first of all, you don't have that security team behind you. You don't have that guidance. It requires a lot of self-discipline because, for example, whenever you need to combine certain other tools to your AWS account, there's a lot of work with IAM. And IAM can get very frustrating very, very fast. And it's always very, very tempting to just say, allow all, and we'll deal with that later. You know, when you'll deal with it after your environment has been breached, and you'll have to explain that to the investors.
Welcome to the DevSec for Scale podcast, the show that makes security a first-class citizen for growing companies. Welcome back, everyone, to the DevSec for Scale podcast. I'm Jeremy Hess, head of DevRel at Achilles. With me today is a good friend and really cool guy, Gil Zellner. He is a fellow DevOps Days Tel Aviv co-organizer, so it's great to have you on the show. And he's also the infrastructure lead at a company called HourOne, which is a really cool AI startup tackling something called synthetic video. For all those thinking that we're talking about some sort of apocalyptic scenario here, what is synthetic video?
So essentially, we allow you to create a video of a synthetic person, or if you want, we have a method of making you a synthetic person and then generating videos using that synthetic person. And the idea is that you humanize the internet that way. Think of it kind of the whole metaverse thing, and it allows you to both inject your being into other places more easily. And also, it allows some of our clients to use this for things like learning and development, where they have a presenter making a large amount of videos without the overhead costs of a studio and all those things.
Got it. We'll talk a little more about that in just a minute. But before we get deeper into about you and the company and the work that you've done until now, because we're talking about the move that you've made from dealing with sort of more of a DevOps type of role to now really getting the DevSecOps into what you're doing, because you used to work at a larger company or larger companies, and now you're working at a startup. So you found that you had to wear more hats. So in terms of the security aspect, what is like the first thing that hit you when you had to move to this smaller startup, realizing that security was more on your shoulders?
No safety net. No safety net. Your ability to move quickly is very much related to your ability to do damage very quickly. Like Uncle Ben said, with great power comes great responsibility, and this is very much the case in smaller startups. You have less people bearing more responsibility. And this means that I have to think more about the security aspects, which normally I didn't really have to in my previous roles.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you might think that this kind of thing could be like a 1-to-1 ratio, but it's probably more like a 0.1-to-1 ratio, where any little security issue that you have can turn into a much larger problem. So you actually have to really focus, buckle down, and make sure you're kind of closing as many gaps as you can.
Well, it's not so much closing the gaps, but rather not creating them to begin with. The whole idea of shift left security has kind of been around for a while, and this really is the case. When you decide to go with an insecure way of doing something, you're essentially creating tech debt just in the field of security for your future self. So if you allow yourself to take a moment and kind of do all the basics, most of the cases you'll find that you won't have that big of an issue later. You just have to not wing it. You need to give it proper thought, just to consider the security implications of whatever it is that you do. And since I have the privilege of working with very talented engineers here, when you convey that message, they totally get it, and they're totally on board, and I don't see any issue with that.
Great. Good stuff. So let's get a little bit about you. What are you doing today? I mean, we spoke a little about the company and what they do, but give us a little about what you're doing on a regular basis and what you have been doing until now.
Right. So this specific role is very, very different than what I had before. So I own infrastructure for HourOne, which is a company meaning you don't only own like your small stack of something. When I worked at Wix, for example, I would own a database and a logging system and Grafana, but that was like 90% of it. That's about it, But now I have to know a little bit about everything. I have to know about our logging and our orchestration, our Kubernetes clusters, our CI pipeline, all these things. So people like to call these one-man show positions, but I think it's exactly the opposite, because you find yourself having to get a lot of cooperation from pretty much everybody else to get these things working. So it's more of a management, but without direct reportees. You don't have a team. I don't have anybody who reports to me, but I have to convince other people to help me get the job done.
No team, but teamwork.
Exactly, a lot of teamwork.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. And what I did before HourOne, I was at Wix. I worked on monitoring. Before that, I was at AppsFlyer, and I did a whole bunch of things in orchestration, DNS, configuration management, that type of thing. And one of the things that I've tried to do along my career is kind of collect all the different types of things that an operations engineer does, kind of like Pokemon, got to catch them all. And that way, when I do get a responsibility like what I have now, I am confident enough that I'll be able to fulfill that role, because I've done all these things before.
Yeah, absolutely. And you speak about it too. I mean, we could also get into more about your life story and all the conferences you go and speak at and all that, but we'll have to save that for later, because we have some very interesting stuff to get into here. So let's go right back into talking about security. What areas of security did you actually have a chance to touch on and get your hands dirty with in your previous roles, if any?
At AppsFlyer, I had to deal with ELB issues, specifically a bit of networking, all that type of stuff. I had to, we had integrations with things like Salesforce and other types of tools that would often have these kind of things that you need to connect to in different ways. So that's one aspect of security. When I worked at Oracle, we had things like things around the data security, mostly because it was a data company. I worked for Oracle Data Cloud, and we, or now as it's called, Oracle Advertising, and we had a lot of things relating to how we keep the data, how we move it around, and this was right around the whole GDPR thing, and so there was a lot of work around that, which is essentially a security issue, right? So that's another example of that.
So you've had the different sort of security roles in a way as part of what you did, but you obviously had it in a different style, right? You had it with sort of teams of security engineers as well behind you, being given, assuming with larger organizations, you have more details given to you about when you're creating whatever feature or whatever you're building, that you need to put X, Y, and Z into it. And then for your next sprint, you need to put in, make sure that these features are, these security patches are added and things like that. So why is it a different sort of ball game when we're talking about moving into this startup mindset of, your own security?
Because first of all, you don't have that security team behind you. You don't have that guidance. It requires a lot of self-discipline, because, for example, whenever you need to combine certain other tools to your AWS account, there's a lot of work with IAM, and IAM can get very frustrating very, very fast. And it's always very, very tempting to just say allow all, and we'll deal with that later. When you'll deal with it after your environment has been breached, and you'll have to explain that to the investors. So that is not. It requires a lot of self-discipline, and because you're managing yourself and pretty much everything else that you do, it means that you need to be very good at limiting yourself and not letting yourself do stupid things in production.
Or in dev environments, which
as well.
also dev environments have their own issues
Oh, of
on
course.
top of others. But so what are, let's say, some of the actual technologies that you're implementing or using sort of in a security capacity, and what have you learned as you've been doing these things? Some concrete examples if you have.
So, examples of that we use Auth0 for user management. Sorry, and I had to learn how that works. I had to learn how social logins work, what works, so for example, there was a thing with LinkedIn login that I had to understand. I had to learn how the tokens were passed and all of these type of things, which are just things that I haven't done before. Which was nice. I had to learn. There was that.
I think we talked about some other things. So just working with, like, in terms of dealing with issues around like SSH keys, making sure that all SAML logins and things like that, as much as possible.
Right. So yeah, SAML login. So I had to. The thing is that all these things are kind of already there, right? You don't have to build almost anything yourself, but you have to know that you need to use it, which is a problem in its own. There's a lot of workaround best practices, and you kind of find yourself Googling a lot more. But here's the thing: the speed in which you go from finding something on Google to implementing it in your own environment is so high that you at some point just kind of ask yourself, is this really right what I'm doing? There's a lot of there's a lot of imposter syndrome here, because you essentially you kind of estimate things. Yeah, I think SAML login makes sense, but I just learned about it 15 minutes ago. Is this really a good idea? And same thing with a lot of things in DNS, which I didn't know that I had to do before, and now suddenly, yeah, I need like all these email records and all these type of things, and these were all kind of new to me, and not because they're difficult or complex anyway, but just because I'd never had to deal with that before. And that is something that happens in these types of roles, because you're a catch-all for everything that has to do with infrastructure. Then you're a catch-all for everything that has to do with infrastructure. Absolutely. And security is a big part of that.
It is a huge part. So what are, let's say, some of the other new things you were introduced to as sort of things that you never really had to deal with before? I think when we talked earlier, you mentioned something about having to deal with bug bounties all of a sudden.
Oh, right. So on my first weekend, I get an email. It says, some guy found a security issue in our site. I think we should deal with it. And I just got the email. So what do we do? And I got that look that says, you figure it out. Which is, that's a good thing. This is why I came to this role. I want to be the person who has to figure out all the problems. So I did some research, and I saw what kind of bug bounties were available. What was the normal type of response that people who do this would like to accept. I checked this with friends who are white hat hackers. Fortunately, I've had the privilege of working with a few of those guys. They are very, very bright and also very, very scary. So we established a bug bounty program. We don't give exorbitant amounts of money like Facebook or Google does, but we do give a small token of our appreciation, and people have been really nice about it. And we even had like a repeat send afterwards, like a person who got paid, and then like he found more stuff and just sent it to us, and he didn't give it to any malicious actors, which means that it's working.
Great. Yeah, definitely new roles that you have to sort of see yourself in, because there just isn't necessarily anyone to be taking ownership of it. So it's always good to know that you're learning another piece of the puzzle when it comes to the security of your company. So Gil, tell me in your organization, what do you see as sort of that shift left trend, and dealing with that from a team level without having sort of that security layer involved?
We have to. It's a necessity. We literally can't do anything any other way, because we don't have a security team. It means that everything will eventually come down to the same engineering people who do these things. So we will always, since it's the same work getting done by the same people, we have to start earlier, because we don't want to redo our work later. That we don't want to do like the after work. If you've seen called the House of Lies, if you remember that show.
That was a while ago, yeah.
Yeah. So we want to avoid the after work. We want to avoid like coming back to fix security issues. What we want to do is do things right the first time. And this essentially means shifting as many things left as we can. So we do things like discuss the security when we're doing the feature, when we're designing the feature, when we're and we don't, like, in every change that we want to make, we have to consider security implications before we kind of test these things out.
Got it. And where do you go in terms of when you have to now implement, or ship your code now? Who's sort of, who's there throughout that process, double checking that things were implemented properly from a security perspective?
It's conveyed to the senior engineers on the team. They're aware of this. They're aware that it's important, and it's their job when they review the code to also take that aspect into consideration. I don't think that it's any different from any other consideration that we have. Today, most engineers also consider performance because they want things to be fast, but they also consider the footprint of their systems because we want to keep our costs down. So we're considering so many things when we're trying to practice good engineering. This is just yet another consideration. It's not any different, and I think the trend is also in that direction. And we see a lot of tools that allow engineers to see these things early, to see packages early. When we use certain deprecated features, we get those warnings. We get those warnings that something is no longer secure. And most tools give you that as well. For example, when you develop social login on Auth0 and you use dev API keys, then it will alert you, and it won't let you do that in production, which is a good thing. And this allows you to catch these things early on.
What are some of the things that you're seeing in terms of, you mentioned API keys. What are some of the things that you noticed or that sort of shifted your mindset in terms of, application security and application access, in terms of sort of like the secret management areas, the access areas, things like that?
Things have become way easier now. So, for example, you see a lot of integrations that work really well with the AWS key secret manager. It's much easier to do least privilege now. You can see assumed roles pretty much showing up everywhere. You can see things like you don't have that situation anymore where there's like all the environment variables that have all the secrets on them on the one single Linux machine that everyone can access no matter what container they're running. Doing all these things on Kubernetes has become way easier. We've had a lot of help, by the way, from TerraSky, who help us with our AWS issues. And they've done really good work. This was done, by the way, before I joined the company. They've done really good work on our Kubernetes clusters and making things very easy to automate. And we're very thankful for that.
What are some of like the hardening solutions that you've seen being implemented as you're growing from the infrastructure side?
We try to use first of all IAM roles for pretty much everything. We try to avoid the actual secrets moving around. you can of course separate keys and separate secrets based on the specific roles that you have, and that in itself is actually a very good solution for a whole plethora of problems. Of course, nothing is bulletproof, and I'm certain that there's probably already somebody who hacked that in one way or another. But for what we need right now, that is more than enough.
And things like the right sort of machines that are being spun up, operating system wise, things like that.
The operating systems themselves have become sort of invisible to you once you're running on top of Kubernetes. So you're kind of like, yeah, I run it on the cluster, and I try not to do anything that is node type specific. There are new things that they came across though. Like for example, because we use GPUs for rendering, so there's a whole there's a whole new type of attack vector here, and I had to learn a little bit about that, though I'm probably not the right person to talk about those type of issues yet.
Well, give us a preview. What does it look like, sort of, in terms of?
So, for example, it's not actually, this is not so much a security story, but rather something that's debugging a production case. So it is very rare to see actual seg faults in production. So I've been in ops since like 2010 in one way or another, and I've never seen a seg fault in production until 2 months ago. And it's very rare to see and because it's so rare to see these things, you're like, okay, how did this happen? I only saw these things before, in operating systems courses and stuff like that. And then suddenly, I noticed this was coming from our GPU, because you're not, and it was just such a surprise for me, like that you actually have to deal with these type of things. So in terms of how would this show up, this has to do with drivers, and apparently you have to install your own drivers on the machines when you deploy them. And I just used something default, and it stopped working because it needed an update, and AWS probably made it an update on their side or in one way or another. And that's just a new thing that I had to learn.
That is really interesting. So getting into the last question, which I ask all of my guests, can you give us one or two ways that devs like yourself can implement security practices, or hopefully best practices, into their daily routines without taking too much time from their regular work?
Least privilege all the things. Just and do it from day one. So for example, if you're developing a feature that has to access, like for example, Elasticsearch or something like that, then start out by crafting the connector that you have in the way that you would use it in production. Meaning, don't use that dev cluster that has open access, but make sure that you lock it down like production, and that way, when you move that feature to production, all you have to do is replace credentials. So that's just one example. Another is that set up automation to remind you of things that you need to update. So a lot of the recent hacks had to do with systems that just weren't updated. If you don't update your software, it doesn't matter that it was patched. So give yourself reminders or set up automations. For example, one thing that I do is just follow the Twitter accounts for software, for certain software that I use. And then I know that, there's a new version, I should probably update to that. And if you set up if you use GitOps in a simple and easy way, it should be relatively easy to upgrade and move these things around.
Fantastic. Gil, it's great to have you on the show. I hope that we can have a follow-up. Maybe we can get more into a bit about the talks that you do, how you prepare for them. We could do like a potential CFP episode. But it's great to have you on the show, and I look forward to the next one. And keep up the great work. And
thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was great. And to all the listeners, stay secure and have a good one.